Hey YouTubers, it's me again, Lonnie Clark, Nuts for Art, Beyond Extinction, whichever venue you find me on. I want to thank everybody for joining me and for listening to these readings. This is part 3, number 3, reading of Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin. I'm going to just pick it up right away. I left you guys off at page 23 and I did not read the whole page. I was so exhausted the other night. But I'm going to keep on, and thank you for your feedback. People have asked me to keep reading, albeit it's not the best reading. So thank you for being dedicated and wanting to hear this. It is a really valuable book. That's why I'm reading it, because right now we're really literally enacting Civil War number 2 right now. Only those people have infiltrated the federal government and they're trying to basically codify white supremacy, and I am going to push back. We need to end the plague of white supremacy. People that hear this book will understand how heinous and inhumane white supremacy is and how futile it is. So let me just jump right in on page 23. I'm going to read at the top to kind of give us a briefing. If you recall, right at the end of the last reading, Griffin had just explained to the black shoe shine man who was shining his shoes that he pigmented his skin, that he was the same person, black, right? So at the top of this page, I'm just going to take off again. I think a paragraph or two might be repeated, but I think it's probably worth it. Well, I'm truly a son of a bitch. How'd you ever? I explained briefly. His heavy face shone with delight at what I had done and delight that I should confide it to him. He promised perfect discretion, enthusiastically began coaching me, but in a guarded voice, glancing away, always to make sure nobody would overhear. I asked him if I could stay and help him shine shoes for a few days. He said the stand really belonged to his partner, who was out trying to locate some peanuts to sell to the winos of the French Quarter. We'd have to ask him, but he was sure it would be all right. But you're way well too dressed for a shine, boy. We sat on the boxes beside the stand. I asked him to check me carefully and tell me if I did anything wrong. You just watch me and listen how I talk. You'll catch on. Say, he said excitedly, you got to do something about those hands. Sunlight fell on them, causing the hairs to glint against the black skin. Oh, Lord, I groaned. What'll I do? You've got to shave 'em, he said, holding up his large fist to show his own hand had no hairs. You got a razor? Yes. Hurry up now before somebody sees you. He became agitated and protective. Down that alley there, clear to the end. You'll find a restroom. You can shave there right quick. I grabbed my bag as he watched in agony to see that the way was clear. The shoe stand was in Skid Row, a street of ancient buildings with cheap rooming houses and bars. I hurried to the alley and walked down it to a gloom of a cluttered courtyard. A few Negroes who could not enter into the white bar were served from the back. They stood around or at wooden tables, drinking. Oh, gosh. I saw a sign that read gentlemen and was almost at the door when several voices shouted, Hey, you can't go in there. Hey. I turned back towards them, astonished that even among Skid Row derelict joints, they had a separate facilities. Where do I go? I asked. Clean on back to the back, a large drunk Negro said, pointing it with a wild swinging gesture that made him almost lose his balance. I went another 50 feet down the alley and stepped into a wooden structure. It was oddly clean. I latched the door with a hook that scarcely held, smeared shaving cream on the back of my hands, and shaved without water. Sterling nodded with approval when I returned. He relaxed and smiled, the way one would after averting a terrible danger. His entire attitude of connivance was superbly exaggerated. Connivance. His entire attitude of connivance was superbly exaggerated. Now, there's not a hitch to you, my friend, he said. Nobody'll ever guess. Then an odd thing happened. Within a short time, he lapsed into familiarity, forgetting that I was once white. He began to use the we form to discuss our situation. The illusion of my Negro-ness took over so completely that I fell into the same pattern of talking and thinking. It was my first intimate glimpse. We were Negroes, and our concern was the white man and how to get along with them, how to hold our own and raise ourselves up in his esteem without for one moment letting him think that he had any God-given rights that we also did not have. A fine-looking middle-aged Negro woman, dressed in a white uniform, stepped out onto the sidewalk a few doors away and stared at me. Sterling nudged my ribs. "You got that widow woman interested," he laughed. "You just watch. She'll find some reason to come down here before long." I asked him who she was. "She works there in the bar. Nice lady, too. She isn't going to rest till she finds out who you are." I began to get thirsty and asked Sterling where I could find a drink. "You've got to plan ahead now," he said. "You can't do like you used to when you were a white man. You can't just walk into any place and ask for a drink or use the restroom. There's a Negro cafe over there in the French Market about 2 blocks up. They got a fountain in there you can drink. Where you can drink. The nearest toilet's the one you just came from. But here, I got water." He reached behind the shoe stand and brought out a gallon lard can with wires looped through the holes in each side to make a handle. A flake of ash floated on the water's surface. I upended the bucket and drank. Well, we're going to have company," Sterling said. "That nice widow woman's coming this way." I glanced down the street. Past the metal upright shoe racks, I saw her walk gracefully towards us. She was carefully looking across the street. She ignored me and asked Sterling if he had any peanuts to sell. "No, dear heart. Joe's out looking for some now. They're hard to find this time of year." He spoke in, oh my gosh, this guy has a good vocabulary, you guys. Unctuously, unctuously, unctuously. He spoke unctuously. Dang, I wish I could use my cell phone to look that word up, but I don't know how to do that and not mess up my videotaping, so I'm going to keep going. He spoke unctuously as though he had no idea why she really came down, but all three of us knew he knew, and that we knew he knew. The game had to be played. Then she turned and saw me, apparently for the first time. She looked startled and delighted. "Why, how do you do?" she said with a magnificent smile that illuminated not only her face, but the entire quarter. I bowed and returned the smile spontaneously because the radiance of her expression took me by surprise. "Why, just fine. How do you do?" "Fine," she bowed. "Nice to see you around." I bowed again, confused. "I thank you, daughter." After an awkward, grin-filled pause, she turned and walked away. "Well, I'll be seeing you," she sang over her shoulder. She got her target out. Okay, I looked dumbly at Sterling. He lifted his cap and scratched into the gray hairs of his head, his eyes wise and wide with amusement. "Did you get that, eh?" he asked. "She liked you. You're in a fix now." He burst out laughing. "You hadn't counted on something like that, did you?" "I sure hadn't," I said. "She ain't no slut," he said. "She's a widow looking for a mate, and you're well dressed. She ain't going to pass up a chance like that." "Oh, Lord, that complicates things," I groaned. Tell her I'm already married, will you? Well, no, I don't know, he smiled. That might just spoil the fun. I think I'll tell her you're a widow, man, a preacher visiting here from New Orleans. I feel like she's the kind who would love to be a preacher's wife. Look, you know I can't fiddle around with things like that. It'll be no fun for her when this project gets known and she finds out I'm a white man. Customers came, whites, Negroes, and Latin Americans. Well-dressed tourists mingled with the derelicts of the quarter. When we shined their shoes, we talked. The whites, especially the tourists, had no reticence before us and no shame since we were Negroes. Some wanted to know where they could find girls, wanted us to get Negro girls for them. We learned to spot these from the moment they sat down, for they were immediately friendly and treated us with a warmth and courtesy of equals. I mentioned this to Sterling. Yeah, when they want to sin, they're very democratic, he said. Yeah, no kidding, folks. When they want to sin, they're very democratic. Though not at all by any means were so open about their purposes. Though not all by any means were so open about their purposes. All of them showed us how they felt about the Negro, the idea that we were people of such low morality that nothing could offend us. These men, young and old, however, were less offensive than the ones who treated us like machines, as though we had no human existence whatsoever. When they paid me, they looked as though I were a stone or a post. They looked and saw nothing. Sterling's partner, Joe, returned from his peanut hunt around 2. We explained my presence and he welcomed me. Slender, middle-aged, he looked young. Joe impressed me as a sharp but easygoing man. He lamented the lack of peanuts. Sterling told him many drunks had stopped by wanting to buy some, and that they could have had made a pocketful of change had they been able to supply them. Joe began to cook our lunch on the sidewalk. He put paper and kindling from an orange crate into a gallon can and set it afire. When the flames had reduced to coals, he replaced a bent coat hanger over the top as a grill and set a pan on to heat. He squatted and stirred up with a spoon. I learned it was a mixture of corn, turnips, rice, seasoned with thyme, bay leaf, and green peppers. Joe had cooked it at home the night before and brought it in a gallon milk carton. When it was heated through, Joe served Sterling and me portions and cut down milk cartons. He ate directly from the pan. It was good despite the odor of rot and smoke then smoked up from it. Oh, excuse me, I'm going to read that again. It was good despite the odor of rot that smoked up from it. Joe leaned over to me and pointed to his spoon to a man across the street. Watch that wino, he said. He'll sit right there. He wants some of this food, but he won't come over till I tell him to. Sitting on the curb across the street, the man stared feverishly at us, tensed, ready to come for food when called. His eyes burned in his black face, and his fists were doubled hard, as though he had to control himself from rushing over and grabbing the food. We ate slowly while the man stared. It was a strange game. We, who were reduced to eating on the sidewalk, were suddenly elevated in status by this man's misery. We were the aristocrats and he was the beggar. It flattered us. We were superbly above him, and the comedy gave us delusion of high self-respect. In a while, the magnanimity of the rich would complete the picture. We would feed our scraps to the poor. Our servings were ample. When we had eaten our fill, we scraped the remains from our cartons onto Joe's plate. The man trembled with expectation as Joe leisurely smoothed the food with the back of his spoon. Then, without looking at the wretch, Joe held out the pan. In a strange kind of tone voice, he said, "Okay, dog ass, come get some food." The man bolted across the street and grabbed the pan. "If there'd been a car coming, he'd have been killed," Sterling remarked. "Now listen, Whitehead. I want that pan back clean, you hear?" Joe said. The beggar's gaze riveted to the food. His face crumpled as though he were about to weep, and hurried into the alley without answering. "He comes here every day. It's the same thing," Sterling said. "I guess he'd starve if it weren't for Joe." Business died. We sat on boxes in the sunlight with our backs against the wall and watched traffic come and go in the French market. I stared into the broken windows of a deserted stone building across the street. Sterling snored loudly and then awoke with a strangled snort. The beggar returned the pan, still wet from being washed. He handed it to Joe. "Okay, Winehead," said Joe. Without speaking, the man drifted away. I listened to the easy and usually obscene give and take between Joe and men of the quarter who passed the sidewalk. "Hey, dog nuts, what's your hurry?" "I got business, man." "What business you got?" "Hey, where can I get some peanuts?" "They ain't peanuts in this whole town. I've been all over." "Me too," said Joe. Odors of sweat, tobacco, coffee, and lampstone surrounded us, overladen always with the smell of fish and nearby salt water. I felt the wall warm against my back, making me drowsy. My first afternoon as a Negro was one of dragging hours and a certain contentment. After a while, Joe took out a pocket Bible from the green serge of his army shirt he wore and began reading the Psalms to himself. His eyes drooped, but he formed the words silently with his lips. From force of long habit, whenever anyone walked by, he'd say, "Shine," without raising his head from the page. 2 pigeons flew down on the sidewalk at our feet. Joe tossed them some bread scraps. The sun sparked iridescent from their purple necks as they pecked. They provided us deep pleasure and anodyne to the squalor and clutter of the street. Joe got stiffly up, dusted his seat, and ambled across to the fish market. When he returned, he had a sack full of catfish heads and some green bananas. He told me the catfish heads were free and that tomorrow we would have them for lunch. Catfish head stew over spaghetti. "Sounds good," I said, looking at the sack of dozens of glittering eyes. Eesh. I don't think I'd want to eat catfish stew. What's it called? Catfish head stew? Oh, catfish heads with the eyes. We wrapped the green bananas he retrieved from the market waste bins and newspapers. "They'll be ripe enough to eat in 2 or 3 days," he said. By 4 o'clock, the street was in the shadow. Sunlight rimmed the buildings above us and the air chilled rapidly. I decided to go find a room for the night. Sterling suggested I go to the Negro YMCA on Dryades, some distance across town. "You better drink some water before you go," he said. "You might not find any before you get to the Dryades." I upended the bucket and saw the brass-colored circles at the bottom through the clear water. Urgh. The bluish haze hung over the narrow streets of the French Quarter. The strong odor of roasting coffee overwhelmed all others. The aroma and the scene reminded me of my school days in France. This was like the old quarter of Tours, where they roasted coffee at the spice shop each afternoon. I emerged on Canal Street to a more modern scene, a crowded scene. I think I'm going to stop here. This is page 30. I see that I'm at 20 minutes, you guys. Sorry I delayed and made my comments there while I'm reading, but I think I'm going to stop here, otherwise it'll get too long. I am going to post a little video, a little commentary about the state of our affairs and why it is urgent that people read our Constitution, understand our Constitution, and realize Donald Trump should be arrested today, to be honest, for the things he's done this week. So put your courage feet on, you guys. We definitely need them, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'm going to do another reading tomorrow, and we'll get through this book inch by inch. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. Ciao. Like and subscribe and share. Be awesome if I could get my channel up to 1,000 people. Love you. Bye.